This is the New York Times bestsellers list for April 7th. Just a few highlights that I want to point out. At the top of the list is still Onyx Storm and Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, still topping the fiction list. And there's a reason for that. We've been joking about the series being at the top for a ridiculously long time, but it's obviously popular for a reason. Super high stakes plot, and it has an awesome premise surrounding a dragon riding academy. There's a real life or death atmosphere and a really interesting take on dragons with this whole bonding system where it's very based on emotions. And the series is really a lot about romance as well, and it focuses on this enemies to bromance trope that's really popular right about now. I don't know why. It's also a little bit George R.R. Martin-esque, where Rebecca Yarros is not afraid to kill off her favorite characters. It's also really big on TikTok, where people have been making thousands of videos about this series, so there's a big community around it. Now, new on the charts this week is Story of My Life by Lucy Score. Here's a synopsis. A romance writer suffering from writer's block moves away from Manhattan and finds inspiration in Story Lake, Pennsylvania. This is a small town romance and a cozy read, very popular. This next one has been on the list for a couple weeks. Broken Country by Claire Leslie Hall. Beth must confront her past when the man she once loved as a teenager returns to the village with his son. This is a historical fiction in a small English farming village. It's kind of a romance thriller. Okay, and I also want to highlight two books from the nonfiction section. The first one is Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams. This one's gotten quite a bit of a buzz. A former Facebook executive gives an account of policies and leadership at Meta, formerly Facebook. This one's really popular because it's a bit of a tell-all about the problematic company corporate culture around Meta during its time between its peak during 2011 to 2017. A lot about Mark Zuckerberg as well. And then one more book, Waiting on the Moon, The Life and Songs of Peter Wolf by Peter Wolf. This is a biography about Peter Wolf, the charismatic frontman of the J. Geils Band, from his early years growing up in New York City to his time as a DJ at Boston's WBCN radio station and his transition to a successful solo career. What I heard about this one is it's a very different type of musician memoir. It's more cerebral and thoughtful, almost philosophical about the culture of art and of artists. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Shamansky, and today I'm joined with the host of My Life in Books, Red Széll. That's another show that airs on AMI Audio, just like this one. Red, what do you think is meant by small minds discuss people? Don't gossip? Is gossip a sign of stupid people?
Well, I think it's a sign that we play the man, not the ball. You know, we focus on criticizing individuals, our neighbors, for doing things that actually sometimes are just more societal problems, and that possibly we should look at the context rather than the individual. Although that doesn't always go true when we are talking about a world which has more and more dictators and strongmen. But I think, yes, our propensity to criticize our neighbors rather than societal problems.
It's like in political debates when they put out an ad hominem attack where they attack the person instead of that person's ideas. I do think it's partly gossip, though, right? I feel targeted because I love gossiping. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I like a good gossip over a pint. But yeah, no, I like to consider deeper ideas as well, which is why I enjoy being on this show so much. We get to talk about some fantastic ideas.
You have a diverse intellect, Red. But for people who love gossiping like we do, I think that's partly why we like fiction. Because fiction is just gossip without the repercussions. Because you get these personal human stories and you hear all the dirt, only it's all fake, but it's just as entertaining.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, all the elements of everything that we ever read in fiction has been drawn from somebody observing somebody else and going, you what? I've got to put that in a story.
And then you just switch up the title of the person, their name, and the location, and suddenly it's fake. But it's probably based on something real.
It's that disclaimer we get at the front of every novel. The characters in this book are not meant to represent anybody real. It's like, yes,
which is so suspiciously defensive. It's like, I wasn't accusing you of that in the first place, but now I'm suspicious.
Exactly, that's right.
But great minds discuss ideas, but genius minds discuss books, am I right?
Well, how can I possibly disagree, Jake?
I wouldn't say genius, but no, a book I especially want to discuss today is Catch 22, which is an elite book of satire. Where do you want to start with this one?
I think that, the best satires set out to lampoon the absurdities of human nature, of our institutions, in Catch-22's case, of the bureaucracy behind war. And they create stereotypes, they parody already ridiculous situations. And as you say, Catch-22 is just kind of pick of the bunch as far as that's concerned. I have never read a better critique of the absurdity of war and playing the numbers game. Poor Yossarian, the protagonist of the book, who is part of a US Air Force bomber crew based on an Italian Mediterranean island, is more afraid of his commanding officer than of the Germans who are trying to shoot him down. Because his commanding officer is insisting on them doing more and more missions so that his command can look better than everybody else's. He doesn't give a damn about the people who are being shot out of the sky. He just wants his team to look good.
And the writing style in Catch-22 by Joseph Heller is hysterical. It's so much more than just a satire on the absurdity of war. It's the observations that he makes of people is just so ludicrous. And it's just a funny book. A lot of very dark humor as well. But like one of my favorite characters is Major Major. His last name is Major, and his position in the army is Major. This is one of my favorite quotes and a good example of these observations that I absolutely love. Listen to this. Also, shades of Terry Pratchett in this writing style, but we'll talk about Terry in a minute. Major had been born too late and too mediocre. Some men are born mediocre. Some men achieve mediocrity. And some men have mediocrity thrust upon them. With Major, it had been all three. Even amongst men lacking distinction, he inevitably stood out as a man lacking more distinction than all the rest. And people who met him were always impressed by how unimpressive he was.
It is just brilliant, isn't it?
And it's paragraph and paragraph like this, like over and over and over. Relatively short book too.
Absolutely. A good quick read, but it is punctuated by you just guffawing with laughter at lines like that. And the fact that Catch-22 has passed into the English lexicon simply because of this book is, well, need we say anything more about how great the book is? When it becomes synonymous with an insoluble situation, with the circular argument, it's got to be a great book.
Well, what is a Catch-22? Because it's become part of the lexicon. Do you want to have a go at explaining what a Catch-22 is?
Wouldn't you prefer to do it yourself?
Because it's hard to explain. I trust you more on this.
A Catch-22 situation is a situation that you cannot get out of. It is a circular argument. I'm trying to think of a really good example of a Catch-22 situation. Yossarian wants to try and get out of the Air Force by proving that he is mad. But to prove that he is mad, he has to be sane enough to be able to argue that he is mad, and therefore the the medical officer discounts his attempt to prove himself as mad because it proves him sane.
That was really well put. But let me get this straight. So the only way to get out of the army is to be proven that you are mad. But the only way to do so is to approach an officer to make the claim that you are mad. But you could not be said to be mad if you were sound of mind enough to approach the officer with that request.
If so you know you're mad, so essentially there's
exactly. Well, but if you know you're mad, then you must be sane, exactly. And so there's no way out of it. It's a genius set of policies that locks people in.
Indeed, absolutely, and yeah, we've all been there. We've all been confronted with those situations where you just go, "I'm stuck. There is no way out of this."
It's kind of like when you're looking for work. And the only way to get a job is by having experience, but you can't get a job if you don't have any experience. And you can't get an experience unless you have a job. There's not much you can do. And a blindness example is when people want a guide dog, but you need good orientation and mobility to get a guide dog. But you say, I'd get out of the house more if I had a guide dog. And you wouldn't get better orientation mobility unless you get out more.
I had to pass a weight cane test before I was allowed to have a guide dog. And I was criticised for never, ever having had a white cane lesson, which I didn't even know existed in the UK. So, yes, that was almost a catch-22 situation.
So. An author has made a poignant message when the title of your book becomes just part of the lexicon in the English language.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. People might not remember who wrote Catch-22, but we all know the phrase.
Can I just share one more line about Catch-22? This was a letter that was sent out to announce the death of somebody's son. Dear Mr., Mrs., Miss, or Mrs. Tanika, words cannot express the deep personal grief I experienced when your husband, son, father, or brother was killed or wounded or reported missing in combat. The impersonal touch of the army, eh? Just fill in the blanks.
Absolutely. And it is funny how often bureaucracy is the target of great satire. We mentioned Going Postal earlier, which is a 2004 book by Terry Pratchett.
Yes.
It's the 33rd of his Discworld novels, and they all satirize something. But in Going Postal, a con man called Moist Van Lipwig is given a last-minute reprieve from hanging by the leader of the place where he's living, and he's made postmaster general. And if he can get the postal service to work again, then he will be allowed to continue living. And the postal service is creaking under bureaucracy and not really having had any money spent on it. Hey, ring any bells? And letters are hand delivered by pigeon. And Moist has to go in and try and get the service to work again. It's also a fantastic critique of how so often the wrong people are put in charge. Being in charge of the post office, Moist is meant to be an honest man. And of course, he's a con man who was about to be hanged for conning people. He is put there by a man called Reacher Guilt, who is determined to instigate his own system of control. So it's also a critique of bringing in new technologies, which take into no account whatsoever how the human beings working in the service are going to react to it. And as with all great satires, it's a critique of human nature, because some of the people working in the postal office sit there and go, well, I'm not going to change because it's been like this all my life and I can't deal with the change. And the other set of people are sitting there going, how can I exploit this system to make more money for myself? It is an absolute laugh a minute. And certainly in the UK, we have just seen our postal service sold off to a Czech billionaire who is promising to keep the delivery going, but a lot of us are watching as to what's going to happen and quite how much it's going to be mechanized and where our postal service is going to go next.
Wow. So going postal has been, I think it came out in 2004. Correct me if I'm wrong. But how timely. And I read a decent chunk of this one too. And there were a lot of ways in how I found that it was like almost like kind of like before its time. Like it talked about political correctness. And the book takes place in a fantasy world, but it feels very much attached to the real world through its satirical commentary. Like there are dwarves in the book, like Tolkien-esque dwarves, and he talks about how they want to be called differently. And or like people insist that the dwarves be called differently because some of these terms are derogatory, but the dwarves themselves don't actually find them offensive. Which I'm like, 2004 he was saying this. It's unbelievable.
It's way ahead of its time, and whilst they're talking about bringing in a sort of a semaphore system to take over from the postal system, so there's this kind of two-horse race going on, and the people in charge of the semaphore system are trying to undermine the postal service as well. You kind of sit there and go, Apple, Microsoft. Or...
Yes. And the postal service in the book is meant to be representative of like the public sector.
Yeah.
Because there are like private companies that are taking over the entire business of postal deliveries that use like magic to do it. And then the government is still using like horses and runners.
Yeah, and we're hearing about Amazon talking about using drones to deliver our stuff to our houses now. How's that going to affect the newly privatized post office? But yes, it's a book for our times.
I was listening to this book and the narration was unbelievably good, at least the version on Széll. And Red, it had to be a cheeky British guy reading this because a cheeky British guy wrote it and it could not work any other way. You need some expressive Monty Python-esque dude to read this thing or else it doesn't work.
Exactly. It's a super tongue-in-cheek book. And again, it's just a laugh out loud book.
What other books did you want to highlight in the genre?
I very quickly, going back 300 years, Gulliver's Travels, possibly one of the earliest novel satires. It's still really fresh today in how it satirizes human nature, human institutions. I mean, it parodies everything from politics to science, from you've got the Lilliputians who are divided down the middle because they can't decide which end of a boiled egg it's better to crack open, and it causes great political divide. You've got a Brobdingnag man being paid for 8 years to research extracting sunlight from cucumbers. And, Jonathan Swift wrote that he wrote the book to vex people rather than entertain them or divert them, I think.
Wow, what a jerk.
Well, he wanted to point out the ridiculousness of just looking at the microcosm rather than the macrocosm. I think it's just how we can, this was not so long after the Catholic Church had spent 200 years debating how many angels could dance on the end of the pin. We do tend to wind ourselves up with the minutiae in life. But if you want his really biting satire, which if you're lucky enough to get the audiobook version I had, he has a pamphlet of Gulliver's Travels, that is. There is a pamphlet that he wrote called A Modest Proposal, where Jonathan Swift suggests that the poor, starving Irish families should be encouraged to sell their children to rich English people as food to ease their economic hardship. And It starts off so reasonable, and you think, oh, God, here's a man 300 years ago, way ahead of the potato famine, saying the British are bad colonial masters, they're exploiting the Irish, they should really do something positive. And then the modest proposal is something utterly grotesque. And I think that's the secret of really, truly great political satire. And unless you want to leap in with a satire of your own, I'm going to recommend that we should all be reading or rereading a book called The Sellout by Paul Beatty, which won the Booker Prize in 2016. Paul Beatty's an American author, and in The Sellout, he sets out to critique race relations in the United States. It is one of the most biting satires I've ever read in my life. Bon Bon, the hero of the book, is sitting in the Supreme Court at the United States defending why he, as a black man in the agrarian ghetto of Dickens, just outside Los Angeles, has reintroduced slavery and segregation because the political system has failed the predominantly black the predominantly black suburb of Dickens. It's a book that only an Afro-Caribbean man could have written in the United States, and it is one of the most laugh out loud and also cringeworthy books I think I've ever read.
Cringe.
And with our
Cringe
situation
how?
at the moment in the United States, oh God, you just sit there and go, I can't believe I'm reading this. I can't believe anybody has written this. But actually, it is so on the nose. It is just absolutely brilliant. And it continues to spark a huge debate over the failure of racial integration in the United States.
And what's the name of that book again?
It's called The Sellout by Paul Beatty.
The thing with satire is that I feel like it cuts through as political messaging more than something more direct than you would see in nonfiction. Because if you're reading a book about how Trudeau completely bungled the housing market in Canada during his time as the prime minister here, he's obviously attacking Trudeau, his cabinet, his work in Parliament when they had a majority. If you were to do that as a fictional satire, you're not really attacking anyone specifically. And so you're reaching the idea much more than you would if you were to attack people directly. It's a difference between discussing the ideas and talking to people, which ties us back to the quote at the top of the episode.
Exactly. Play the ball, not the man. And I don't think The Sellout would be funny if it was
real,
factual.
Yes, yeah. I think it's just depressing.
The only way you can make things funny is just to magnify them, parody them, stereotype them, make them so unbelievably, dreadfully cringeworthy that you have to laugh, because otherwise you would be crying.
So, Red, I know that your upcoming guest on My Life in Books was the one that inspired us to talk about satire and the power of satire. Who's your guest and what's their book?
So he's a Montreal-based author called Arjun Basu, and the book he's written is called The Reeds, and it's a satire of 21st century life, especially family life, in Montreal, a city which is obviously undergoing quite a lot of regeneration with all the change that engenders. And his family is a mixed family. He has 2 adopted children who've come from other countries, and his wife is Japanese. He's Mexican, Anglo-Mexican, I think, the protagonist, and it is a reflection of 21st century Canadian life in Montreal.
Awesome. Red, we're pretty much out of time, but that episode of My Life in Books is coming out on April 7th. I believe that'll be available wherever you listen to podcasts, but it also airs on AMI Audio at 3 p.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays, I believe.
Indeed.
Red, really quickly, what's the idea behind your show? I know you've done this here before, but I just want people to know because the format of your show is awesome.
It's authors talking books. We like to dig deep into the author's latest book, some of the major themes they like to explore through their work in general, and then 3 books that have resonated with them as authors. So yeah, it's people talking about the things that they love to read and write.
Before I let you go, I want to thank you also for bringing my attention to Going Postal by Terry Pratchett. I'm thoroughly loving this audiobook right now. I unironically just want to stop recording and go listen to that one again. Red, thank you so much. We'll talk in 2 weeks.
Always my pleasure, Jacob. Go well.
That was Red Széll. He's the host of My Life in Books on AMI Audio. It's also available as a podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms. That's all the time we have for this episode of AMI Audio Book Review. We air on AMI Audio at 1 p.m. Eastern and repeat every 6 hours on Saturdays and Sundays. But we also make ourselves easy to find. We're on all the big podcasting platforms as well, and YouTube, so you can subscribe to our channel and like our videos while you're there. You can send us an email at audiobookraeview@ami.ca, and you can follow us on Instagram at AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Happy listening.